The Moonstone Pack had never crowned a female alpha, not once in the entire history of their bloodline, not across 7 generations of succession, not through war or plague or famine. The title had always passed from father to son, shoulder to shoulder, like a torch never allowed to change hands. Until tonight. Silver banners cascaded from towering cedar beams overhead, each one embroidered with the white crescent moon of the Moonstone crest. Wolves from allied packs had traveled days to fill the grand hall, their formal attire and careful smiles masking the whispers that passed between them like smoke. Quiet, relentless, impossible to extinguish. Servants moved between polished tables with trays of deep red wine and roasted meat, their eyes downcast, their steps practiced and invisible. At the center of it all stood Trinity Ravenwood. Beautiful, untouchable, and utterly, completely trapped. The heavy white gown clung to her body with the weight of expectation. Seed pearls glittered along the neckline in elaborate patterns her seamstress had spent 3 weeks sewing, and the long sleeves swept elegantly to her wrists, concealing, as they were designed to, the pale scars that lined her forearms. Those scars were a map of every sparring match she had survived, every warrior twice her size who had thought she would be easy to defeat. They were proof of a decade spent doing the impossible, proving she belonged. She adjusted the silver alpha crest pinned at her waist and tried to make the gesture look casual. It didn't. The symbol should have made her proud. It should have filled her with the warm, consuming sense of destiny fulfilled. Her father had placed it in her hands himself, his eyes bright, his voice hoarse with emotion, and she had felt, in that single moment, that every bruise and every scar and every sleepless night had finally meant something. Standing in this hall, surrounded by faces she couldn't read and smiles she didn't trust, the crest felt less like an honor and more like a target painted over her heart. Trent, you still have time to run. Trinity turned sharply. Her brother materialized from the shadow of a carved stone pillar, a champagne flute dangling from his fingers with studied nonchalance. He was dressed impeccably. Charcoal gray suit, silver cufflinks, and he wore resentment the way other men wore cologne. Everywhere, all the time, without seeming to notice it. Trent Ravenwood was handsome by any measure. Dark hair, sharp jaw, the kind of commanding height that filled a room. Where Trinity's dark eyes held the quiet sharpness of someone who listened before speaking, Trent's burned with something older and less patient. Something that had curdled over years of watching and waiting and being passed over. Trinity, you're already drinking? Trent, you're getting married. I thought the occasion deserved it. Trinity, you hate this wedding. Trent, I hate what it represents. His voice dropped low enough that the nearby wolves couldn't have caught it, but Trinity heard every syllable. Trent, a woman taking the alpha title while our enemies sharpen their blades at our borders. A throne handed to sentiment while the pack bleeds. Trinity, father chose me. That's not sentiment, it's succession. Trent, he chose wrong. The words landed like claws dragged slowly across stone. For a long moment, neither sibling spoke. Music drifted through the hall, something cheerful and elegant, floating above the undertow of tension between them like a boat navigating a river of ice. Around them, guests laughed and refilled glasses and clinked crystal together, and none of them saw the fracture spreading quietly through the Ravenwood family. Trent stepped closer, his voice barely a breath now. Trent, you know what the warriors say? That you're marrying Drake to shore up a claim you couldn't hold on your own. That you need his pack because ours doesn't truly trust a female at the helm. Trinity, do you trust me? A pause, long enough to be its own answer. Trent gave a short, bitter laugh. Trent, I think you've spent your entire life trying to prove you belong somewhere that should have been mine. Trinity, there it is. She'd expected it, had been bracing for it for weeks. But hearing it spoken aloud, calmly and without apology, still drove the air from her lungs. Trinity inhaled slowly and held her brother's gaze. Trinity, father didn't choose me because I'm stronger than you. He chose me because I don't reach for war every time my pride takes a wound. Trent, the Lycans grow bolder every season. Entire packs are disappearing. Villages are burning to the waterline. And you stand there speaking of patience like it's a virtue when it's a cage. Trinity, charging blindly into a fight we don't understand will get our people slaughtered. Trent, you sound weak. Trinity. I sound careful. There's a difference, though I understand if you've never found the distinction useful. Trent's expression flickered, something cold moving behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Trent, perhaps Drake will teach you what real leadership looks like. He pressed a fresh champagne flute into her hand. Trent, for luck, sister. Then he disappeared into the crowd, swallowed by silk and candlelight. Trinity watched him go, the champagne glass cool against her palm, unease settling into her bones like cold moving through stone. Something was wrong tonight. The air itself felt held, like the forest beyond the hall walls was pressing its breath against the windows, waiting. A hand settled against the small of her back with familiar ease, and Trinity turned to find her future husband standing beside her. Drake Ashwood was everything the pack needed to see at her side, broad-shouldered, composed, handsome in a way that communicated power before he'd spoken a single word. He wore his ceremonial black with the ease of someone who had always expected to occupy important rooms. Drake, everything all right? Trinity, my brother is being himself. Drake, then ignore him. Tonight is about unity. Unity. The word landed flat against Trinity's ribs. Not love, not joy, not the kind of permanence she'd quietly, foolishly allowed herself to hope for when she was younger. Just unity. The careful political vocabulary of two packs pressing their borders together and calling it a marriage. Trinity lifted the champagne glass. Trinity. To unity. She drank, and the liquid burned, strange and metallic, down the back of her throat. Her brows pulled together. Her vision tilted. The hall bloomed suddenly too bright, too loud. Every laugh sharpened into something unbearable, and every note of music sliding sideways off the scale. She pressed her fingertips against the nearest table. Drake. Trinity. Trinity. I need air. She moved through the crowd before he could reach for her, shouldering past silk-draped guests who parted without quite understanding why. The great doors groaned open and the cold night struck her face like a palm. Trinity breathed. The moon hung enormous over the mountains, silver-white and merciless, flooding the stone courtyard with light that seemed to come from inside the sky rather than from any fixed point. The pines surrounding Moonstone territory swayed in a wind Trinity couldn't feel on her skin, only in her chest, something instinctive and ancient stirring awake. Something was wrong. Something was very. A howl split the darkness. Not ceremonial. Not the proud celebratory call of an allied pack announcing their presence. This sound was raw and ragged and desperate, the distress signal she had trained warriors to recognize since her first year of command. Trinity froze. A second howl answered. Then a third. Then the night erupted. Screaming erupted from inside the hall. Boots crashed against stone. The scent of blood arrived on the wind, copper and iron, and the specific, visceral wrongness of packmates bleeding. Attack. Trinity's pulse thundered to life. Without hesitation, she seized the heavy white skirt of her gown in both hands and tore, the fabric giving way at the seams with a sound like a sentence cut short. She let it fall, rolled her shoulders, felt the familiar electric heat build beneath her skin. Then she shifted. The transformation was practiced and seamless, bones reshaping with the liquid ease of long habit, silver fur flooding across her body, her alpha power surging up through her chest like a tide returning to shore. She was enormous in wolf form, graceful, built for war. She sprinted toward the tree line. She never reached it. Pain exploded across the back of her skull. The ground rushed up. She hit the dirt hard, the world fragmenting into pieces of silver light and cold earth. Through blurred vision, she looked up. Moonstone warriors surrounded her. Her own pack, her own people, and in every pair of eyes staring down at her, she saw the same terrible thing. Intent. Darkness swallowed her whole. Before we begin, if you love dark Lycan kings, forbidden mates, and stories that make your heart ache, like, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe for epic Lycan king romances, where omegas rise, kings fall, and love is never gentle. Betrayal under the moon. Cold rain found her first. It hammered down through the pine canopy in silver curtains, soaking her fur, filling her nose with the smell of wet earth and blood, some of it hers. And Trinity clawed her way back toward consciousness the way drowning creatures claw toward surface. Slow, painful, Necessary. She woke choking on mud. Voices drifted through the rainfall nearby. Low. Careful. The voices of men who didn't expect to be overheard. Voice 1. Did you hit her too hard? She's been under a long time. Voice 2. She's breathing. I can hear it. Voice 1. Good. Trent wants her conscious when it happens. The name cracked through her like winter ice, giving way. Trent. She forced herself to stay still. Every predator's first instinct, and cataloged the clearing through one barely open eye. For warriors formed a loose circle around her. All moonstone wolves. All men she had trained beside and commanded and trusted. One held silver chains, the kind used for executions. Ice spread through her veins. A low growl built in her chest before she could stop it. Warrior. Move faster. If Drake finds out before this is done. Second warrior. He won't. Just keep her. Trent. She's awake. The voice cut through everything else the way a blade cuts through silk. Clean and terribly quiet. Trent stepped from between the trees, rain darkening his black cloak and flattening his hair against his forehead. He looked, in that moment, like every version of himself that Trinity had ever tried not to believe existed. Composed, implacable, utterly empty of regret. Trinity lunged. Pain detonated through her limbs the moment she moved. Wolfsbane, heavy and nauseating, still saturating her bloodstream from whatever Trent had slipped into her champagne. She hit the ground 2 feet from where she'd started. Trent, you should have stayed under. This would have been easier. She snarled up at him. In her wolf voice, the single word carried across every mind in the clearing. Why? One warrior flinched. Trent merely crouched, bringing his face level with hers. When he brushed the wet hair from her muzzle, the gesture was almost gentle. Almost. Trent, because you were never meant to lead. Father saw what he wanted to see, what he'd built the story of in his own mind, and he refused to see what the pack actually needs. He made a mistake. I'm correcting it. Trinity. And Father? Where is he? Something shifted in Trent's expression. Something that might, in another man, have been shame. Trent. He died an hour ago. He collapsed during the attack. His heart. The world stopped. Every sensation narrowed to a single point and then winked out. Sound. Feeling. The cold of the rain. The burn of the wolfsbane. All of it. Just gone. Trinity. No. Trent. The pack needs strength now. A leader who doesn't hesitate. Someone who understands that. Trinity. You killed him. Her voice had gone very quiet. Wolves heard it better that way. Trent. I allowed nature to correct a mistake. There's a difference. He stood. The warriors moved forward. Silver chains rattled in the rain like something counting down. Trinity measured the clearing with the part of her mind that never stopped calculating. Distances, positions, weights, angles. She was weakened. She was outnumbered. She was poisoned. None of that changed what the alpha blood in her veins was screaming. When the nearest warrior's hand closed around her foreleg, Trinity moved. She drove herself upward with everything she had left. Every snarling, furious, grief-drunk ounce of alpha strength that the wolfsbane hadn't managed to reach. And her jaws found his throat before he understood what was happening. Blood sprayed across the clearing like rain going sideways. Chaos erupted. Trinity ran. Hunted. She ran until the forest blurred. Her paws ate distance in great bounding strides, the undergrowth tearing at her flanks, branches scoring lines through her fur, the rain turning the ground to treachery beneath every footfall. She should have been magnificent like this. An alpha wolf in full flight is one of the finest things the forest ever holds. But magnificence requires strength, and the wolfsbane was busy dismantling hers by degrees. Behind her, the howls of moonstone warriors carved the night apart. They were her people. She had learned their patterns, trained in their formations, memorized the sound of each one's voice. Now she used that knowledge in reverse, anticipating where they would fan out, which paths they would cover, which hunters among them would be fastest. She leapt a swollen river, landed badly, and felt the impact reverberate through a foreleg that had already taken too much. Pain flared. She kept running. The forest eventually thinned. Lights appeared ahead. The sprawling electric glow of the human city, close enough now that the pine smell was already giving way to asphalt and exhaust, and the thousand mundane smells of human life. Trinity hated cities. Too many eyes. Too much noise. The way the artificial light bleached the moonlight and made the world feel flat and stripped of depth. But cities offered cover. And cover, right now, was the difference between breathing and not. She crossed the highway in the dark corridor between two trucks, close enough to feel the displaced air roar past her, and hit the city pavement at a sprint. Humans screamed. Someone dropped a coffee cup. Phones appeared in hands with the reflexive speed of the modern age. Trinity didn't slow down. She weaved through alleys, following the narrowest corridors, the paths too tight for large wolves to pursue at speed, until the sounds of the city folded around her and she could no longer hear the pack howling her name. Then the wolfsbane finished what it had started. Her legs went. She collapsed behind a rusted dumpster in an alley that smelled of rain-soaked cardboard and motor oil, and the world immediately tried to narrow down to nothing. Blood pooled beneath her from wounds she'd stopped cataloging. Each breath came shallower than the last. She thought, with the odd clarity that arrives sometimes at the very edge of things, that this was a deeply undignified place to die. First female alpha in Moonstone history. Murdered by her own brother in a city alley that smelled of garbage. The irony had a particular weight to it. Footsteps echoed at the alley's entrance. She tried to stand. Failed. Tried again and made it halfway before her legs simply refused to cooperate further. Then another scent arrived through the rain. Different from wolf. Different from human. Ancient and layered and carrying underneath it the weight of centuries. The way certain stones carry the heat of summer days after the sun has gone. Lycan. Every story she'd grown up hearing assembled itself instantly in her mind. The old accounts, the histories, the warnings handed down through packs like family heirlooms. Lycans were not wolves. They were something older, something that had walked out of the age before memory and decided to remain. Stronger than any wolf alpha. Faster. Bound to no pack. Answerable to no moon. Royalty of a kind that made werewolf hierarchy look like children arranging rocks. A figure stepped into the alley. Golden eyes found hers through the rain and the dark. And the world, for one suspended, inexplicable moment, shifted. The Lycan Prince. Lance Valerian had a talent for being exactly where he shouldn't be. Tonight, that meant an underground Lycan bar 3 levels below a parking garage that didn't officially exist, in a city that his father hadn't sanctioned him visiting, at an hour that bore no relationship to anything resembling responsibility. The music was loud enough to feel in his back teeth. The company was excellent. The whiskey was better. Life, Lance had decided some years ago, was considerably improved by the aggressive pursuit of all 3. Darius, your father's called twice in the last hour. Darius Vane, his oldest friend, his most reliable co-conspirator, and the only Lycan he trusted to tell him the truth even when the truth was inconvenient, dropped into the seat across from him and slid a full glass in his direction. Lance. Then he'll have to call a 3rd time. Darius. He said it's important. Lance. He always says that. 2 years ago it was important that I attend the Northern Summit and sit through 9 hours of territorial negotiations about riverbed rights. Riverbed rights, Darius. Darius. You fell asleep in the 3rd hour. Lance. I lasted 3 hours. I consider that a personal victory. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it with the practiced ease of someone who had been ignoring things he didn't want to deal with for the better part of 30 years. As second prince of the Valerian Lycan kingdom, Lance understood precisely what was expected of him. He was supposed to attend council meetings and present a united front with his brother Adrian, who had been born for politics the way some people were born, with perfect pitch, naturally, effortlessly, without apparent effort. He was supposed to be preparing for war, for succession, for the 1,000 responsibilities that came with royal blood. He found most of it suffocating. Not because he was incapable. He wasn't. He knew what wars cost, and what thrones demanded, and why the careful machinery of the kingdom had to keep turning. He understood it all perfectly. He simply preferred this. The uncomplicated honesty of a good night, good company, and the clean, simple pleasure of being, for a few hours, nobody's prince. The phone rang again. Lance sighed and answered it. King Magnus. Where are you? Lance. Handling something. King Magnus. You're in that bar again. Lance. I'm enjoying the city. King Magnus. There is unrest among the northern wolf packs. Several pack leaders have disappeared inside a single night. I need you back here. Lance straightened slightly. Despite himself. Lance. Disappeared meaning. King Magnus. Meaning gone. Meaning the intelligence coming in is fragmented and none of it makes sense. Meaning something is moving in the dark and I need my sons where I can reach them. A pause. King Magnus. Tonight, Lance. The line went dead. Darius raised an eyebrow across the table. Darius. Throne calling. Lance. It never stops. He stood and retrieved his coat from the booth. Outside, rain was happening at the city the way rain sometimes decided to happen, not falling so much as arriving from every direction simultaneously. He was halfway down the first alley when the scent stopped him cold. Blood. Heavy. Recent. And beneath it, wolf. Not rogue. Not common. The unmistakable signature of alpha blood, rare and rich as old metal. Lance followed it. 3 alleys, 2 turns, and a narrow passage between buildings that ended in a dead end. And there, collapsed in a pool of streetlight and rain, a silver wolf breathed in shallow, labored increments behind a rusted dumpster. Even half-dead and trembling with exhaustion, she radiated alpha presence the way certain objects radiate heat, not aggressively, not consciously, just as a property of what they fundamentally were. Lance crouched slowly, hands open, telegraphing nothing threatening. Lance. Well, you're a long way from your forest. Golden eyes met his. Even now, they held defiance. Then footsteps arrived at the alley entrance. Heavy, purposeful, the stride of a large wolf who expected no resistance. Moonstone Hunter. There she is. Step aside, Lycan. She's ours to collect. Lance stood. Slowly. He didn't turn around immediately. There was a particular kind of message in not turning around, and he'd learned to use it precisely. Lance. HM. And if I say no? The hunter stepped into the alley. Recognition crossed his face the moment he saw Lance clearly. The particular stiffening of a man who has just understood he's made a miscalculation. Moonstone Hunter. She murdered one of our men. She's a traitor too. Lance. She's bleeding on the ground in an alley. He turned now and let the hunter see his eyes, gold going amber, the ancient Lycan power that lived behind them surfacing just enough to be visible. Lance. From where I'm standing, the only thing I see is a pack pursuing an injured female through a human city. Which is exactly the kind of thing that makes every Alpha Council very, very interested in what your pack has been doing with its evenings. Moonstone Hunter. She belongs to Moonstone Pack. This isn't your business. Lance. I'm making it my business. Silence stretched between them like a blade held flat. Then the hunter turned and walked away, not running, because running would have been an admission, but quickly, without looking back. Lance turned back to the silver wolf. She was already going under, the last of whatever had been holding her up finally failing. He caught her before she hit the ground. And the moment his hands closed around her, something detonated inside his chest. Ancient, impossible, the kind of recognition that rewrites everything you thought you understood about yourself and your plans and the life you'd been perfectly happy constructing. Mate. The word didn't announce itself. It arrived, complete and irrevocable and devastating, the way some truths do. Lance stood in the rain with a dying wolf in his arms and stared at the sky for a long, quiet moment. Then he carried her inside. The forbidden bond. Consciousness returned in pieces. Warmth first, the specific enveloping warmth of expensive bedding and a properly tended fire. Then the sound of rain, still present but muted now, pressing against glass somewhere distant. Then the smell, clean linen, wood smoke, and underneath both, the layered ancient scent of Lycan. Trinity's eyes opened. A penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing a city rendered dark and glittering beneath the rain. Furniture built for permanence rather than style. Dark wood, clean lines, nothing decorative. Books stacked on every available surface. And across the room, in a chair angled toward the fire, a man watching her with golden eyes. Lance Valerian didn't look like what she'd expected a Lycan prince to look like. She'd expected something more overtly monstrous. The stories always leaned toward the monstrous. What she got was dark hair falling across a forehead that probably gave orders to a great many people, a jaw suggesting he'd spent years deciding which arguments were worth having, and eyes that were gold in a way that had nothing to do with human eyes and everything to do with the thing that lived behind them. He looked, she thought, like trouble that had learned to sit still. Lance. Good morning. Or evening. You've been out for a while. I've lost track. Trinity tried to sit up. Her body filed an immediate formal objection. Trinity, you should be dead. Lance, that's a strange thing to say to the person who patched up your wounds. Trinity, you're a Lycan. Lance, extraordinarily observant. You must be an alpha. Trinity, why did you help me? Lance tilted his head slightly, considered the question as though it had more weight than she'd given it. Lance, because your pack was trying very hard to kill you, and that seemed like something worth interrupting. Trinity, what do you want in return? Lance, interesting that that's your first question. Trinity, I understand politics. Nothing powerful creatures do is free. Lance, true enough. He stood and walked toward her slowly. Not quickly, not with any urgency, just the measured movement of someone who had learned that patience was its own kind of pressure. Lance, you smell like fear every time I get near you. Trinity, shouldn't I? Lance, probably. He stopped beside the bed. And then, in the same tone he might have used to state the weather, he said, Lance, you're my mate. The room held its breath. Trinity, no. Lance, yes. Trinity, that's not possible. Lycans and wolves don't. Lance, apparently no one told fate that. Trinity stared at him. He stared back. Neither of them looked particularly happy about it. Trinity, this cannot happen. Not now. My pack is. Lance, trying to kill you. Yes, I noticed. Which is why they'll need to go through me to do it. He said it simply, not as a boast, not as theater, just as a statement of fact the way other men stated that it was raining. Trinity looked at the bandages wrapped around her forearms. Neat. Precise. The work of someone who'd done it carefully. Trinity, you treated my wounds yourself. Lance, you seemed like the kind of person who would object to strangers. Despite everything. Despite the grief pressing on her chest, the anger coiled in her stomach, the terrifying, impossible bond she could feel pulsing between them like a second heartbeat. Trinity felt something shift in her expression. Not quite a smile, but the place one comes from. Lance noticed. Lance, you don't have to trust me, but your enemies will come looking. And when they do, I intend to be standing between you and them. What you do with that is up to you. Trinity was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, Trinity, my father is dead. She hadn't said it aloud before. To anyone. The words sat between them without decoration. Lance said nothing. He simply sat down in the chair beside the bed and let the silence be what it was. Not empty, not pressed full of reassurances, just present. The way certain forms of company are presence rather than noise. And something tight and armored inside Trinity's chest loosened, fractionally, against her will. Shadows of the throne. The Moonstone Pack Alpha courtyard had never felt smaller. Trent stood at its center with rain soaking through his formal clothes, watching the faces of his pack arrange themselves around him. Shock and grief and confusion, and, underneath all of it, the particular frightened attention of people who needed someone to tell them what came next. He was good at this part. Trinity attacked the gathering. She used the chaos of the assault as cover, murdered one of our best warriors in cold blood, and fled into the night when cornered. Our Alpha, our father, suffered a heart episode during the commotion. He did not survive. The gasps that moved through the crowd were genuine. Some of the warriors looked at the ground. An older she-wolf pressed both hands over her mouth. Trent let the grief settle for exactly as long as grief served his purposes. Then, Trent, the pack cannot be without leadership. Not with the threats gathering at our borders. Not now. I am my father's son. I will hold this territory. Drake Ashwood stood at the edge of the gathering and said nothing. He watched. Drake had survived several political transitions in his life and had learned that the first hours after a power shift were the most revealing, not because of what people said, but because of how precisely they'd clearly been prepared to say it. Trent had been ready. Too ready. The words had come out smooth and sequenced, grief worn in exactly the right places like a coat selected for the occasion. An elder stepped forward carefully. Elder, we found no body. Alpha Trinity, Trent, will not return. The elder hesitated. Elder, and if she does? Trent's expression became very still, the way deep water is still. Trent, she won't. Later, when the crowd had dispersed to its grief, Drake fell into step beside Trent beneath the overhang of the Alpha Hall. Drake, you moved quickly. Trent, someone had to. Drake, Your father's collapse. The timing of it. Trent. Is that a question? Drake. Consider it an observation. Silence. Trent turned to look at him directly. Trent. The pack needs certainty. That is what I'm providing. Whether or not you choose to stand beside that certainty is your decision to make. Drake. And if Trinity is alive? The question landed like a stone into deep water. Trent held Drake's gaze for one long, careful moment. Trent. Then we have a problem. Both men understood that the alliance between them had just become something conditional, something fragile, something that served exactly as long as their interests aligned and not one breath longer. Drake walked away into the rain. Trent watched him go, and in his chest, something that had once been a conscience supplied a single quiet observation, which he smothered immediately. Trinity was not the kind of thing that stayed smothered. The prince and the wolf. Trinity healed with the grudging efficiency of someone who found recovery and imposition. Lance discovered this quickly. He also discovered that she was impossible to manage, deeply suspicious of every kindness, constitutionally incapable of accepting help without immediately looking for its cost, and in possession of the most infuriatingly precise mind he had ever encountered. She argued about everything. The best route back to Moonstone territory. The strategic value of waiting versus acting. Whether wolfsbane antidotes worked better administered in 2 doses or 3. She had opinions, and she stated them with the calm certainty of someone who had never particularly needed anyone to agree. He found it, against his better judgment, absolutely captivating. On the 4th evening, he came into the main room to find her standing at the balcony glass, watching the city below with the focused attention she gave everything, complete, intent, like she was already cataloging it for some future use. Lance. You're pacing again. Trinity. I pace when I'm thinking. Lance. You're always thinking. Trinity. One of us should be. He smiled at that. She didn't see it. Trinity. You should let me go. I need to get back to Moonstone territory. Lance. No. Trinity. My people are in there. Whatever Trent is doing. Lance. You don't survive charging back into a pack that just tried to execute you. Not without a plan. Trinity. So help me make a plan instead of hiding me in a penthouse. Lance crossed the room, stopped a few feet from her, close enough that the mate bond hummed between them like a string drawn taut. Lance. You were poisoned. You were hunted. You nearly bled out in an alley. And you still want to go back. Trinity. They're my people. Not all of them wanted this. Lance. You're still trying to save them. The ones who betrayed you. Trinity. The pack didn't betray me. My brother did. The warriors who followed his orders were afraid, or loyal to him, or deceived. I'm not going to punish every wolf in Moonstone territory for the choices Trent made. Lance was quiet for a moment. Then, because honesty seemed to be the only currency she respected. Lance. You're a better leader than your pack deserves right now. Trinity. Or I'm just stubborn. Lance. Both, probably. She turned to look at him, finally. Up close, the amber gold of his eyes held more depth than she'd let herself acknowledge before, layered like old amber, like something that had seen a great many years and chosen which ones to keep. Lance reached out and brushed a strand of dark hair from her face. Heat detonated beneath her skin at the contact. The mate bond surged forward, hungry, insistent, impossible to reason with. Trinity went very still. Lance. Careful. Trinity. Why? Lance. Because I've been working very hard at not kissing you, and you're making it increasingly difficult. The admission was so quiet and so plainly honest that Trinity didn't have an immediate response to it, which was unusual. Before she could construct one. Darius. The king knows about the wolf. Lance closed his eyes briefly. Lance. Of course he does. Darius. He's summoning you. Both of you. Trinity met Lance's gaze. Trinity. Your father. Lance. My father. A pause. Lance. Try not to challenge him to a fight in the first 5 minutes. He tends to take it personally. The Lycan king. The Valerian throne room had been built to make people feel small. Trinity decided, approximately 3 seconds after entering it, that it succeeded. Black stone columns rose 40 feet to vaulted ceilings carved with the histories of Lycan kings. Silver flames burned in ancient braziers, casting light that moved rather than flickered, alive, almost. The floor was dark marble, polished to the point that Trinity could see the ceiling reflected beneath her feet. The room smelled of old power the way certain libraries smell of old paper. Completely, inescapably, without apology. At its center, elevated on a dais and seated in a throne built for exactly this moment, was King Magnus Valerian. He was not what she'd expected either. The Lycan king looked neither ancient nor particularly fearsome in the conventional sense. He looked, if anything, like the version of Lance that time and consequence would eventually produce. The same quality of stillness, the same sense of compressed force behind careful eyes. But where Lance wore his power loosely, like clothing he hadn't bothered to button all the way, Magnus Valerian wore his like armor, fitted, intentional, covering everything. When his gaze found Trinity, it didn't move from her. King Magnus. Interesting. One word. Into a silence large enough to hold it. Lance. She's under my protection. That's not a request for your approval. Magnus regarded his son with the expression of a man who had heard this particular sentence in a great many different configurations. King Magnus. To think that a werewolf alpha would find herself entangled with our bloodline. Trinity. I didn't seek it out. Several guards reacted. Magnus simply looked at her, and something in that look shifted, measured, adjusted. King Magnus. Good. Directness I can work with. He descended the dais steps with unhurried precision. King Magnus. Do you understand the scope of what is happening in the wolf territories right now? Trinity. My brother staged a coup on the night of my bonding ceremony and had our father killed. Beyond that, I've been somewhat occupied. Magnus stopped before her. He was taller than Lance by a marginal amount that somehow meant a great deal in this room. King Magnus. Packs are collapsing. Loyalties are dissolving overnight. Warriors who have stood together for decades are turning on one another without coherent reason. Our intelligence suggests something external is accelerating it, some influence at work in the dark that we have not yet named. Trinity's mind moved quickly over the pieces. Trinity. Not just in Moonstone territory. King Magnus. In 5 packs across 3 territories. Growing. He studied her. King Magnus. Tell me, did your father ever speak to you about the blood crown? The phrase landed differently than ordinary words do. Trinity went completely still. Once. She'd heard it once. She had been perhaps 11 years old, had wandered into her father's study late at night, and found him bent over old manuscripts with an expression she'd never seen on his face before or since. When she'd asked what he was reading, he'd closed the book, taken her face in both hands, and told her with more seriousness than the moment seemed to need. If you ever hear those words, you walk away. You don't ask questions. You walk away. She'd never heard the words again. Until now. Trinity. Why are you asking about that? King Magnus' eyes turned very dark. King Magnus. Because someone already has it. Blood moon rising. The nightmare came the way prophecy always came. In fragments that felt more real than reality. A forest burning from the roots up, fire moving through the undergrowth with purpose rather than chaos. Wolves fleeing it in terrified formations, their howls building into something communal and agonized. And at the center of all of it, elevated on a ridge of black stone with red light bleeding down from the sky around it, a crown. Not silver, not gold, bone, ancient and yellowed, set with stones that pulsed like open wounds, and eyes watching from behind it. Patient eyes, the kind that had been patient for a very long time. Trinity woke with Lance already beside her. She'd learned that about the mate bond, that it broadcast distress like a signal fire, his hand finding her shoulder in the dark with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it for years rather than days. Lance, tell me. She described it. All of it. The crown, the fire, the eyes. Lance was quiet for longer than usual afterward. Trinity, you know what it is. Lance, I know what it was made to do. The blood crown was forged during the Lycan Wolf Wars centuries ago. Old magic, the kind that exists before names. Whoever wears it can project dominance over any wolf below alpha rank. With enough power behind it, it could reach alpha-blooded wolves too. The pieces assembled themselves in Trinity's mind with terrible clarity. Trinity, the aggression, the betrayals, the packs turning against their own people. If someone were projecting compulsion through it, Lance, they could start wars between packs that wouldn't otherwise exist. Trinity, and sit back and watch the damage accumulate. A knock at the door. Darius entered without preamble. His face told the story before his words did. Darius, a survivor reached us an hour ago. She came through the eastern forest. She says. He stopped. Exhaled. Darius. Moonstone Pack has fallen. The Alpha Hall is gone. Most of the remaining loyalists are dead. The survivor says Trent wasn't leading the attack. She says the wolves who came wore his colors, but moved wrong, like puppets. Like something else was pulling the strings. Trinity went very still. Darius. And she described the one at the center of it. The one giving orders. A pause. Darius. Red eyes. Not wolf. Not natural. The three of them sat with that for a moment. Then Trinity stood up. The hunt begins. She armed herself in silence. Black leather armor. Twin silver blades. The ones Lance had acquired without her asking, fitted to her measurements, which she hadn't decided how to feel about. A third blade at her thigh. A fourth at her belt. She braided her dark hair back with the quick economy of someone who had done it before battle more times than before any celebration. Lance watched from the doorway. Lance, you're still healing. Trinity, I'm healed enough. Lance, medical opinion? Trinity, mine. He walked into the room. Lance, then I'm coming with you. Trinity, I didn't ask. Lance, good thing I don't require asking. She turned and looked at him. Really looked. The way she hadn't let herself. The careful, full assessment of someone trying to understand what they were working with. Trinity, if this goes wrong. Lance, things have already gone quite wrong. I don't see how my presence meaningfully worsens them. Trinity was quiet for a moment. Then, because it had to be said, Trinity, my brother might be too far gone to save. Lance, I know. Trinity, if it comes to it. Lance, I know that too. He crossed the room and stopped directly in front of her. His hands found her face, careful, unhurried, and tilted it up until their eyes met. Lance, you have been carrying this alone your entire life. Every decision, every consequence, every outcome you couldn't control. You survived it. All of it. Alone. A beat. Lance, you don't have to do that anymore. No one had ever said those words to her before. Not in that order. Not with that particular weight. Trinity didn't answer. But something in the set of her shoulders changed, almost imperceptibly, the way stone changes when the frost finally releases it. Trinity, we leave at nightfall. Lance, then we have 2 hours. Let me feed you something first. Trinity, I don't need. Lance, Trinity, eat. Then we go to war. She almost smiled. This time, she didn't quite stop it. Fire in the forest. They smelled the destruction before they saw it. Smoke. Thick and old. Not the clean smell of wood fire, but the acrid, specific stench of things that weren't meant to burn. Homes. Furniture. The accumulated material of lives built in one place over generations. Trinity's jaw set. The forest borders showed the damage in stages. First, just the ash drifting through the pine canopy like black snow, then scorched patches at the tree line, then the first ruins of outbuildings, then the full devastation of what had once been the pack's outer village. Bodies lay beneath broken trees. Trinity knelt beside the nearest one. She recognized him. A young gate warrior, 19, maybe 20. She'd corrected his footwork in a sparring session 3 weeks ago. He'd laughed about it afterward, easy and young. She pressed 2 fingers to the cold earth beside his hands. An old wolf gesture. An acknowledgement. Lance's hand settled on her shoulder. Lance, we'll stop this. Trinity. No. She stood. Trinity. We'll destroy whoever caused it. There's a difference. A scream split the smoke-heavy air, close, ragged, cut short. Both of them moved instantly, following the sound through the ruined outer village to a collapsed storage building where a child of perhaps 8 crouched against a rotted log, while 3 rogue wolves circled at the edges of the clearing. The wolves turned when Trinity and Lance emerged. One of them sneered. Rogue wolf. More traitors. The Alpha is very interested in traitors tonight. Trinity shifted. The shift came fast and clean, fury making it faster. Alpha power surging forward with the pent-up energy of days spent healing and waiting and holding herself back. She came out of it enormous and silver and absolutely done with patience. Lance shifted a half-second later. She'd seen Lycan forms and illustrations. She understood intellectually that they were larger, faster, more devastating than any wolf. The intellectual understanding did not quite capture the reality. Lance in his Lycan form moved like something from a different category of being. Not larger in the way that large things are large, but larger in the way that storms are large, filling the available space completely and making it impossible to imagine the space containing anything else. The rogues lasted approximately 40 seconds. They fled at the 41st. Trinity shifted back and found the child staring at her with wide, not quite believing eyes. Child. Alpha Ravenwood. Trinity. Are there others? Survivors. Child. At the river. In the caves. We've been hiding since. The howl came then. Not wolf. Not Lycan. Something that occupied the space between those categories and below them. A sound with age and wrongness and a kind of hunger in it that didn't belong in the natural world. Every creature in the forest went silent. Lance's expression shifted in a way Trinity hadn't seen before. Not fear exactly, but the precise, controlled awareness of someone who has heard a specific sound and immediately begins calculating. Lance, that is not natural. Trinity, what is it? His golden eyes move through the tree line, measuring. Lance, something very old that someone very foolish has woken up. The monster wearing a crown. They found Trent at dusk, or what the blood crown had left of him. The Alpha Hall stood partially collapsed, 2 walls gone, the ceiling open to the darkening sky, the carved cedar beams that Trinity had grown up beneath now lying in splinters across the stone floor. Torches burned in brackets that somehow remained upright amid the destruction, casting light that moved wrong, as though the shadows it created weren't following the rules they were supposed to follow. Trent stood at the center of it. Blood covered his hands to the elbows. His eyes had gone entirely crimson, not the amber red of wolf eyes at peak aggression, but a flat, pulsing red that carried no warmth and no humanity behind it. And resting on his head, small and terrible and thrumming with something that wasn't quite energy and wasn't quite sound but was both. The blood crown. It was smaller than Trinity had imagined. Bone-white arches, perhaps 8 inches at their highest point, set with stones the color of clotted blood. Ancient beyond age. Older than the hall. Older, she thought, than the pack. And it had eaten her brother from the inside out. Trinity. Trent. The thing wearing her brother's face turned and smiled. Trent. Little sister. You came back. I'd hoped you would. The voice was Trent's, but wrong in the register, slightly off, like a familiar song played in the wrong key, just enough to make the wrongness feel worse than total strangeness would have. Lance. The crown has fully consumed him. He's not making his own choices anymore. Trent. Consumed. What a word. I prefer completed. He spread his arms. Trent. I finally became what this pack needed. What I always knew I was meant to be. Do you feel it? The strength. Trinity. I feel what the crown is doing to you. This isn't strength, Trent. It's a cage with better architecture than the one you were already building for yourself. Something moved behind his eyes, quick, painful, real, and then the red swallowed it again. Trent pointed at Lance. Trent, kill the Lycan. The dominated wolves came from everywhere, from the ruined walls, from the dark beyond the torchlight, from the shadows beneath the collapsed beams. Trinity moved before thought, silver blades finding rhythm, muscle memory overriding everything else. She fought hard and she fought clean, targeting joints and pressure points rather than throats, because these were her pack, and she would not kill them for a crime the crown had committed. Lance was a different proposition entirely. He moved through the controlled wolves with the absolute economy of someone working rather than fighting, precise, devastating, leaving them incapacitated rather than dead, because Trinity had asked it of him without words, and he'd understood without being told. Then Trent attacked. He covered the distance between them in the kind of burst that shouldn't have been possible for a werewolf alpha, the crown amplifying him beyond his natural limits, driving power into his frame like current through wire. His claws caught Lance across the chest. Blood sprayed. Trinity. Lance. Something inside her ignited. Not rage. She'd had rage all night, had been running on it since the moment the champagne burned wrong going down her throat. This was different. This was deeper and more complete, and it came from a place she hadn't known existed, hadn't ever been shown the door to. Silver light erupted from her skin. Every wolf in the hall froze. Even Trent. Because Trinity's power, her alpha power, her birthright, was no longer recognizable, as merely wolf. It had another note in it. Ancient, royal, the specific resonance of a bloodline that didn't belong entirely to any single lineage. The blood crown cracked, a sound like something old being denied. And for the first time all night, real fear moved across Trent's face. The last alpha heir. The silver light didn't stop. It built, radiating outward from Trinity's body in expanding waves, the kind of light that wasn't warm or cold, but simply present, pressing against every surface in the ruined hall with a weight that felt, impossibly, like recognition. Like something being called home. The dominated wolves sank to their knees one by one. Not from injury, from the same instinct that made every wolf in a pack lower its head when a true alpha spoke. Trinity hadn't consciously called it. It had come on its own. Lance stared at her from across the hall, one hand pressed to his wounded chest, and said nothing. Darius, what is she? Lance, something we haven't seen before. The answer arrived in Trinity at the same moment Lance said it. Not as knowledge exactly, but as the feeling of knowledge, the interior certainty of remembering something you never consciously knew. Her mother, the woman her father had never spoken of, never named, never allowed to be discussed in the Alpha House. The woman whose bloodline her father had clearly been hiding for 17 years. Half wolf, half Lycan, royal on both sides. Trent. No. He screamed it. All the crown's borrowed rage flooding the word, and launched himself at her with everything he had. Trinity caught his wrist. Effortlessly. The way you catch something you've been reaching toward for a long time. The crown cracked further. Dark energy leaked from the fractures like something finally being let go. Trinity. Listen to me. She held his gaze. Poured everything she had into it. Not the power, not the silver light, just herself. Trinity Ravenwood, who had trained beside this man since childhood. Who had looked up to him once and then slowly, painfully stopped. Who had mourned him before he was even gone. Trinity, you're still in there. I know you are. I need you to. His eyes cleared. For one suspended moment, her brother looked back at her from behind the red. Pain. Pure and uncomplicated. Trent, I'm sorry. Then the crown drove back in, and his hand drove a silver blade into her side. The pain was enormous and immediate, the kind that narrows the world down to a single point. Trinity heard herself gasp, felt her knees try to go. Lance roared. His Lycan form erupted through the remaining space in the hall like a force of nature with a direction and a purpose and no interest whatsoever in mercy. He crossed the distance to Trent in 2 strides. His claws closed around the crown. The crown fought back. Dark energy discharged through Lance's hands. Lance, who had ancient Lycan blood that the crown's wolf-targeted compulsion couldn't reach, who had lived his whole life resisting things that tried to consume him, who had decided, at some point in the last 10 days, that this particular battle mattered in a way most battles hadn't. He held on, and the blood crown shattered. The sound it made wasn't sound. It was a sensation, a pressure releasing, like air rushing into a space that had been sealed for centuries. The dominated wolves collapsed. The dark energy dissipated. The hall became just a ruined hall, full of exhausted people and the smell of smoke. Trent collapsed. Trinity caught him. Despite the blade still in her side, despite everything, he was light in her arms, somehow lighter than he'd been in life, like the crown had been giving him a weight that was leaving now. Trent, I was so angry. His voice was entirely his own again. Young-sounding. Tired. Trinity. I know. Trent. I thought if I could just. Trinity. I know, Trent. Trent. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about Father. I'm sorry about all of it. Trinity held him tighter. Trinity. You were my brother. Were. The word did the work she couldn't. Trent exhaled once. Long complete. Then his body went still. And the hall was silent. Lance crouched beside her. His hand found her face. Gentle. Urgent. The mate bond wide open between them now, carrying grief and pain and the complicated, unwilling love of someone who had decided another person mattered. Lance. The blade. Trinity. I know. Lance. Trinity. Trinity. I know. She closed Trent's eyes with 2 fingers. Then she let Lance carry her out of what remained of the hall, through the ruins of the pack she'd spent her life trying to deserve, into the night and the clean cold air and the moon that remembered everything. Bound by moonlight, Moonstone Pack rebuilt slowly. It rebuilt the way that living things rebuild, not all at once, not cleanly, not without arguments about what to keep and what to leave in the rubble. There were nights when Trinity sat with the council until long past midnight, working through succession questions and resource allocations and the delicate matter of what to do with warriors who had followed Trent's orders. She was fair. She was relentless. She was, several council members observed to each other in the quiet hours, very much her father's daughter. They rebuilt the Alpha Hall last. It rose from its own foundations, rebuilt using the surviving cedar beams, the stone repaired, the moonstone crescent remounted above the main doors. The day they opened it again, every surviving wolf in the territory came. Trinity stood before them in the morning light, not in white this time. In the deep silver gray of the moonstone's ceremonial alpha color, her dark hair loose, the alpha crest pinned at her collar. And this time, it didn't feel like a target. It felt like hers. The eldest elder stepped forward. Elder, Trinity Ravenwood, daughter of the Moonstone bloodline, do you accept the title and burden of Alpha of Moonstone Pack, in blood and in binding and in the sight of the moon? Trinity looked out over the gathered wolves, old faces and young ones, warriors who had followed her father and children who had never known another Alpha, wolves who had been afraid and wolves who had been brave and wolves who had made choices they were going to have to learn to live with. Her people. She looked just once at Lance. He stood at the edge of the gathering, not centered, not positioned for visibility, just present. He met her gaze and the corner of his mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile, but was its close relative. Trinity, I accept. The howl that went up from the pack filled the valley and climbed the mountains and rolled outward across the territory like a tide. Power surged through the Alpha bond. Not the aching, contested, half-held power of the weeks before her ceremony. Real power, acknowledged, sealed, complete, flooding through the invisible threads that connected her to every wolf in Moonstone territory. Trinity raised her face toward the winter sky and breathed. Later, after the celebration, after the feasting, after the long and winding conversations that these occasions always generated, Trinity stood beneath the moon alone. Or almost alone. Lance, you're going to be insufferably good at this, aren't you? She didn't turn around. Trinity. Probably. He came up beside her. They stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at the moon, and for a while neither of them needed words for anything. Lance, you almost died. Trinity. So did you. Lance. And here we are. Trinity. Here we are. A pause. Lance. You still haven't answered my question. Trinity. Which question? Lance. Whether you still fear me. Trinity turned to look at him. The moon lit his face and she saw, for the first time with nothing between them, not urgency, not crisis, not the specific kind of blindness that comes from running for your life. Exactly who he was. The prince who preferred bars to thrones. The Lycan who had caught a dying wolf in an alley and then, against every reasonable expectation, simply refused to put her down. The mate the bond had chosen for her with complete disregard for her plans. The man who had said, "You don't have to do this alone anymore," and meant it. Trinity. No, just the one word. Lance kissed her. Not carefully, not tentatively. That wasn't either of them, and they both knew it by now. He kissed her the way the mate bond had been trying to for weeks, with all the accumulated patience that patience had finally used up. Trinity kissed him back. The moon hung above them. The pines moved in their slow winter sway. The valley below them held 1,000 wolves beginning the long work of rebuilding something worth having. And fate, which had been working on this particular arrangement for considerably longer than either of them knew, settled into something that felt, for the first time in a long time, like satisfaction. The Alpha and the Lycan prince. Even after blood, even after betrayal, even after war. Bound. The second crown. 3 months later. Peace, Trinity had learned, was not a state you arrived at. It was a practice, a discipline, a daily choice made in the face of everything that argued against it. 3 months after the blood crown shattered on the Alpha Hall floor, the Moonstone Pack was not healed, but it was healing, which was a different thing and a better one. The distinction mattered. Healing meant motion. Healing meant the wound was not still open. Healing meant there was somewhere to go. She and Lance had settled into the complicated, occasionally exasperating, privately wonderful business of building something between them. He remained the second prince of the Valerian kingdom. She remained the Alpha of Moonstone Pack. Neither of those things was going to become simpler with time, and they both knew it, and they had both decided, sometime in the months following the battle, that knowing something was complicated was not the same as deciding against it. King Magnus had given his blessing in the way the Lycan king gave most things, precisely, without sentiment, and with the specific quality of observation that suggested he had already anticipated the outcome and was simply acknowledging it. Lance had told Trinity afterward, with some satisfaction, that it was the first time in memory his father had been genuinely surprised. She'd been quietly pleased by that. The pack councils were ongoing. The rebuilding continued. New alliances were in negotiation. The world was doing what the world always did, turning, demanding, producing new problems in the wake of old ones. Trinity handled it. She was very good at handling things. And Lance, true to form, handled her tendency to handle everything by showing up, repeatedly, with food and counterarguments and the occasional reminder that the alpha was also a person who required sleep. It worked, in the way that things work when both parties involved are too stubborn to let them fail. Tonight the valley was quiet. She lay in the dark with Lance's arm across her waist and the moon, through the window, casting its familiar silver geometry across the floor. She'd almost been asleep. Almost. Deep beneath the world, far beyond the northern boundaries of Moonstone territory, past the peaks of the Ashen Range, past the dead city that appeared on no current maps, past the underground river that ran black through caverns no torch had reached in living memory, there was a room. The room had no name. The people who knew about it didn't refer to it at all, if they could help it. Those who had to did so in the past tense, as though even naming its existence required distance from it. Torches burned in the room's brackets, not with flame, but with the dark light that certain old magics produced, illuminating without warming, casting shadows that moved independently of the things that should have been creating them. A figure stood at the room's center, hooded, still, patient in the way that things are patient when they have never had to worry about running out of time. On the altar before the figure rested an object, a crown, bone, ancient, set with stones that pulsed with something that was not light and not energy, but was what those things came from, the source before the source. It was not the crown that had burned in Trent's mind. That one was dust now, scattered across the floor of a ruined alpha hall, returned to its constituent materials by a Lycan's hands and a half-blood alpha's power and the particular obstinacy of two people who refused to lose. This was the other one, the older one. The first crown had been made for wolves. This one had been made before wolves existed, in an age when the only things walking the earth were older than any name currently in use. And it had been waiting, because old things were good at waiting, for the moment when the first crown's destruction would announce that the game could begin in earnest. A sound drifted from the darkness beyond the altar. Not quite a voice. Not quite the absence of one. The figure bowed its head. The figure. The first vessel has been destroyed. The wolf-blooded prince has chosen his mate. The bloodlines are now joined. A pause. Then the darkness replied. The sound of it was the sound of something that had been deciding things since before the concept of decisions existed. Unhurried. Absolute. The patience of geological time compressed into something that had learned to think. Then the time has come. Wake the others. Trinity sat bolt upright in bed. Lance was awake in the same instant, the mate bond carrying the shock of it before his conscious mind caught up. Lance. Trinity. She was on her feet, moving to the window. The night looked normal. The moon, unchanged. The valley below, quiet. Her pack's heartbeats through the alpha bond. She could feel them now. All of them. Every wolf sleeping in Moonstone territory, steady and unalarmed. Nothing was wrong. Everything was fine. And yet, Lance, what is it? Trinity pressed one hand flat against the glass and looked toward the northern horizon. Nothing to see there, just mountains, just darkness, just the ordinary geometry of the world at night. But she felt it, something she didn't have a word for yet. A presence, immense and patient and awake in a way it hadn't been awake before, like a tide that had been gathering in the deep ocean for an uncounted time and had just now decided to move toward shore. Trinity. The blood crown was not a weapon. Her voice was very quiet. Trinity. It was a signal. Lance came up behind her. She felt his warmth against her back, the mate bond carrying the specific texture of his alertness, the way he sharpened when something mattered, leaving carelessness entirely behind. Lance. A signal for what? Trinity didn't answer immediately. She was listening to the part of herself that was older than she was. The Lycan blood her mother had given her and her father had hidden from the world. The deep inheritance of something royal and ancient that was only now beginning to understand its own range. And from that deep place, from the bloodline that predated pacts and crowns and the wars that had been fought over both, something answered her unspoken question. The blood crown had been one of two. The shattering of the first had been the condition required for the second to be unlocked. And the second was not made for wolves. It was made for what came before wolves. Trinity, how long has your family known about the original Lycan Wolf Wars? Not the history books. The real account. The part that was kept out of them. Lance was very still for a moment. Lance, what did you just feel? Trinity, something woke up. A pause. Lance, then we need to call my father. Trinity, tonight. Lance, right now. Trinity turned from the window. In the dark of the room, she could see him clearly. The gold of his eyes carrying something she had learned to read over the past months. The precise quality of attention he gave to things he considered genuinely dangerous. He was giving it now. She nodded once. Then she crossed the room, opened the wardrobe, and began to arm herself. Because Trinity Ravenwood had learned many things in the months since her bonding night. About power and grief, and what bonds could hold, and what betrayal cost, and what it felt like to be both more and less than you had believed yourself to be. But the most important thing she'd learned was the one Lance had said to her in a penthouse in the rain. With her wounds still fresh and her options still narrow. You don't have to do this alone anymore. She wasn't the only alpha now. She wasn't the only royal. And whatever had woken up beneath the world tonight, whatever ancient thing had been gathering its patience while the first crown burned and the second waited, and two impossible people found their way to each other through blood and fire and the stubborn insistence of fate. It had not anticipated this. It had not counted, in its long calculations, on the possibility that the bloodlines it had spent centuries trying to keep separate would be joined before it made its move. It had not imagined that the Alpha and the Lycan Prince would already be standing side by side when it finally opened its eyes. Old things had old blind spots. And Trinity Ravenwood had always been very, very good at finding them. End of Book 1. The story continues in Crown of the Ancient Dark. Narrator closing. The moon remembers everything. She remembered the first wolves and the first Lycans and the wars they fought before either of them understood what they were fighting over. She remembered the crowns that were made from that violence and the hands that made them and the intentions that shaped them. She remembers tonight. A woman standing at a window in the dark, feeling something ancient wake beneath the ground, turning to face it anyway. A prince reaching for his phone to call his father about the end of the world, wearing the specific expression of a man who has finally found something worth being serious about. Two impossible people, bound by a force that didn't ask their permission, standing side by side at the beginning of something that will cost them everything and give them more than they knew to want. The moon doesn't worry about outcomes. She simply watches and remembers and continues in her circuit, certain, as she has always been certain, that the things worth fighting for are worth the darkness they require. She has seen enough stories to know how the good ones go. They go, not without cost, not without loss, not without nights when the mountain feels too high and the enemy too old and the bond between two people the only warm thing left in the dark. But they also go onward. They go together. And that, the moon will tell you, if you stand beneath her long enough and learn to listen, is enough. It has always been enough. Thank you for listening.